afternoon, and welcome to St. Joseph's University's webinar on Research-Based Writing Seminar. I'm Kate McConnell with the Office of Graduate Arts and Sciences here at St. Joseph's University, and I'd like to thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to attend today's webinar. We are joined today by Dr. Todd Krug. He's the Director of Cooperative Education here at St. Joseph's University. This is the second time he is presenting this webinar on research-based writing. I think you're going to find it quite informative. I would encourage you throughout the webinar to use the box available at the bottom of your right-hand screen to type in any questions you have. Dr. Krug will address those questions at the end of the seminar. Also, at the end of the seminar, you will be given an email address and any other information he would like to provide to you if you have follow-up questions at the conclusion that after we're finished the webinar. Again, I would like to thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule today, and I'm going to pass over the microphone to Dr. Krug so we can get started. Dr. Krug?
Hey, thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for being part of this. I have a PowerPoint, as you will see in front of you. It has some guiding thoughts. And then once we're through with that, be happy to take your questions. So be thinking of things as we go through. If I've skipped something that might be on your mind, I'll also do a little break when I'm through in the transition for when questions come up. I've been teaching research-based writing for quite a few years, so really what you are going to get is the highlighted points from the course that I teach. And I think when students first get a research paper assignment, one of their first reactions is to feel a little bit overwhelmed. And it can be overwhelming. So what I'd like to start is with a guiding thought. Just your curiosity must be the driving force behind your research paper. You really need to find something that you truly like, that it's a genuinely academic topic, and that you're going to find enough scholarship on it. And we're going to be getting into that in just a little bit. The next screen talks about establishing your tasks. So I have listed first is to find a good topic. You can do that in a variety of ways. It may be rooted in what you're studying in the class. It could be something that's going on that you're reading about in literature. It could be in the newspaper, magazines, what you're hearing on TV, whatever the case might be. But it's also important to learn what the assignment is asking of you. A distinction that I make in my course is between a research paper and a research report, and they're different. A research report is that paper that we all remember from high school where you more or less would go out and just find what's out there, put it down in a paper, and report it back to the instructor. It's probably not what you're going to be asked to do at this point. The research paper provides a thesis. It's something interesting. It's something of substance. It identifies a problem to be solved or an issue to be addressed, something that leads to us having a better understanding of a particular phenomenon. Those papers are actually easier to work with because it gives you some elbow room to do some thinking and to bring some meaning to a topic. Next, you will want to develop a working knowledge of your topic. Basically what that means is just do some casual background research. Find out if there's enough information there, if you like what you're seeing, and this will actually start to give you some search terms and ideas that you can use when you start to use the library, and I know you heard about that yesterday. Third is to narrow and focus your topic, develop a thesis, and create some research questions. Students will very often come to me and they'll say, oh, I want to do my research topic on something to do with whatever. It's a large category. Would that be okay? And the answer is almost always yes. And then I ask, well, what are you going to do with that? Well, someone might come up and say, well, I want to do my topic on spirituality. Okay, that's fine. I say, well, what population might you want? And they might say, well, maybe African Americans. Well, are you looking at men or women? Well, I think I'll look at men. Well, in what context might you want to take a look at that? Well, how about maybe when they're in college? That's a time when people are really struggling with different elements of spirituality. And there actually happens to be a research paper that we use as an example in my course, and the title of it is The Role of Spirituality Among African American College Males Attending a Historically Black University. And you can hear from that title how tightly focused and how narrowly focused that is, which is a long way from just I want to do something on spirituality or on culture or something about university students. It's focused. So your thesis, as I mentioned, where are you going to take this? And then some research questions. What might you want to know about to help guide your research? Next, begin reading and doing the research, and that ties into the last, don't procrastinate. Whenever you get the assignment, begin. I would say that if there's one area that my students underestimate, it's the amount of time it takes to do this. It can be easy to be lulled into a sense of security with the technology and the library, which is amazing. It's really, really good. But it still takes a lot of time to go through the volume of what you're going to find, determine what's useful, and apply it to the topic. Okay. Now, that said, before we get into some common questions, what I tell students when they get a research paper is to don't think about it as one large, overwhelming task. Break it down. Research papers are actually very formulaic things, and they have particular parts. And if you think about them in their component parts, they can be a lot easier to write. Okay? The first part is the introduction. Okay? That's where you're introducing your topic. You build a case for the importance of researching your topic. You give us a thesis statement or pose some questions to explore. Okay? That's where you give any background that you might need. If there is an operative definition you need to offer, you can offer it there. For example, in the study I just mentioned, spirituality. Some people use spirituality and religion interchangeably. Some people make a distinction there. How are you using it? That's what you would show in your introduction. You're basically notching out the area that you're going to research, telling us what you're going to do, and then you move on. Okay, that's done. Next would be your review of literature. This is where your library work is going to come into play. Obviously, when you do a search and you see you get hundreds or thousands of hits, you can't include everything in your review of literature. What you're looking for there would be representative scholarship, the key scholars, the key ideas that attach to the thesis or the topic that you're working with. One of the mistakes students sometimes make in the review of literature is just to list out paragraph by paragraph little summaries of the scholarship that they found. And that's not really what you want to do. You want to use your scholarship in such a way that it develops and promotes your thesis and the point of your paper. So in your review of literature, when you have scholarship, you're analyzing it, you're interpreting it, you're showing agreements and disagreements, you're showing where and how it applies to your thesis and to what degree that it does. You're talking about who the key figures are, who the key thinkers are, and really giving us all the necessary background that we need. Okay? After the review of lit comes your conclusion. The error that a lot of students make in this area is they think that the conclusion is just to summarize what the paper has already done. Not so. Your conclusion is to start to say, so what do we do now? What do we do next? What needs to be done? Who needs to do it? What money is involved? What resources are involved? What timeline is involved? You want to give the specifics of what to do to resolve your thesis. This is your way of working with the information. You've probably all seen on the news an interview after something terrible has happened, and somebody, from the neighborhood invariably makes the remark, somebody needs to do something. Well, you as the researcher are the somebody, and you are proposing the something. that's what you need to do in your conclusion. If you think about the paper in those three areas and basically filling in those blanks, that starts to help you put everything together once you know what needs to go there. If you do not, by the way, have the handouts that I'm using to walk through this, I will make sure that you receive them as an email. The handouts that I have that I use in class have a lot of narrative detail in these categories, and they'll give you a lot of good information to go on. Okay? So with that in mind, some common questions. These questions are not questions I just sort of pulled out of the air, but in the course of teaching the course, these are questions that students commonly ask me. I figured you probably have the same ones. So I'll go through these, and of course any questions that you have in addition to these, I'll be glad to take up. So the first question that I often get, are the ideas that I put on the research proposal changeable, or do I have to do exactly what is on the proposal from the start? I ask my students to give me a research proposal. It outlines sort of their idea, gives me some of their research questions, and gives me a starting thesis. So that's what I mean by research proposal. And the answer is those ideas are changeable. Your research process will be one of discovery and learning. So it's very possible that you may come to some different places with the idea and the topic as you research. And you can change that. Even particularly with the paper, students will write an introduction. They'll go through the paper, and they often go back and they're a little distressed the introduction doesn't always match exactly what they did. Well, the easy way to do that is to go ahead and reshape the introduction to match the paper. It's not cheating. It's not unethical. It just matches where your learning curve has come to at the end of the process. Okay, the next one is common knowledge. And when do I need to cite? Do I only need to cite quotations? Hey, this gets into a sticky area. You've probably heard of academic honesty. There's an academic honesty policy at the university. And intellectual property. By law, if you take the words, the ideas, the concepts that a researcher has developed, you have to offer credit to that researcher as the person who invented or created them. But there is something called common knowledge, and so you don't have to necessarily cite every single fact. There may be historical facts, when something was discovered, when a particular war happened. That would be common knowledge. Everybody knows that. Some people ask, well, beyond that simple idea, how do I know when something is common knowledge? A general guideline I give to people is to take a look at the research that you're doing and you're finding in the library. If you're finding a concept or an idea is talked about in a lot of articles, and people aren't referencing it there, it's probably considered common knowledge in that field, so you don't necessarily need to cite it. The safety net that I give to people is if you have doubt, cite it, because you can't get in trouble necessarily for citing it, but you can get in trouble for not citing it, so err on the side of caution. When do you need to cite? As I'd mentioned, whenever you are using words, ideas, concept theories that are unique to a particular person. And to the question, do I only need to cite quotations? No. You definitely cite quotations, but again, any words, ideas, concepts, theories that belong to somebody else, you still need to make sure that you cite those. Okay. How can I pick a good topic? What makes a topic good? We covered some of that, so I'm going to hit this one briefly. But really what makes a good topic is one that's narrowed, that has a lot of purpose, and has some direction. It has a thesis that can be operationalized in some ways, and that it can take you somewhere. Topics that might be good but not useful are topics that are too current. Sometimes people want to do research on something that's happening right now, but there's really not enough time for scholarship to have made its way into the referee journals that you heard about yesterday. So watch the timeline of your topic. It could be good, but just too current to find scholarly material. Okay? I've always been told my topics are too broad. How can I narrow it down? I gave you the quick example of African American males and spirituality at college, and I think you sort of saw the construct for that. But sometimes you can use, time or place or events to narrow something down. And also taking a look at scholarship. You initially have an idea, you like the area, but until you find out the issues, the conversations going on in that area, it can be hard to narrow it down. So be comfortable living with the broad topic at first, and then use what you've learned to narrow it down. Okay. After I do my research, I have all of this information that I don't know what to do with. Can you give me some ways I can use what I have? How do I know what I can or shouldn't use? I tell my students to keep everything until the paper is done, because you never know what you're going to use. Having a focus and a good research topic and a thesis definitely helps you know what you can use and what you don't need to use. The other thing that you can do is, if you have a lot of information, is you can combine it. When you're referencing somebody, maybe 5 different people basically are talking about the same thing. You don't necessarily have to have 5 different sentences or 5 different paragraphs to deal with that. You can just reference them all in one parenthetical reference, that all of these people are dealing with the same information. And that can help you establish connections, show continuity, show similarities and differences, and still respect and use a lot of the volume of the information that you have. When I write research papers, I always feel like I'm just putting together what other people have said. Is this what a research paper is supposed to be? It is not. You will be using a lot of ideas from other people, but I tell my students, consider this to be support for where you're going, for your thesis and what you're doing. If all you're doing is putting together references and ideas from other people, you have eclipsed your voice in the paper. To go back to one of the functions I mentioned in the review of Lit, you need to be analyzing, interpreting, explaining, comparing and contrasting. Show us how you want us to read the scholarship that you have in terms of your thesis. Don't just put it in there and hope that we as a reader are able to make the connections and understand it the way you mean it. Tell us that. And once you start doing that kind of work, you'll find that your voice returns to the paper, and you will be the voice working with the scholarship and guiding us through, rather than the scholarship alone doing that. Okay. When I did research in the past, I found the journal articles almost impossible to understand. What can I do about this? It's a learning curve. You want to think about looking at these journals almost like learning a culture, a different community of people. You're going to learn the way they talk, the way they organize ideas, the terms that they use, and there is a learning curve for that. So you're going to have some discomfort up front. Try to sustain that and keep going. Now, some journals may be too high-end, and so find something else that's easier for you to understand and work your way up to it. But it really comes down to a matter of familiarity. And once you start learning the terms, you see how things are organized and what people are doing. It's actually not as complicated as it looks when you first see it. But I'll admit, the journals can look really boring and maybe even a little dreadful. They're not shiny, there are no pictures or very few pictures like you're used to seeing in magazines. They look very formal and very stale, and sometimes visually that's intimidating to people. But once you start to read it, and over time, it does come together. Okay? What are some of the biggest problems your students have with writing research papers? One is time, not starting soon enough. Another, believe it or not, as basic as it is, ignoring what the components of a research paper should do. What does the introduction do? What does the review of literature do? What should the conclusion do? I just finished reading some papers for a class, and there are several in there that have introductions. And by the time I get to the end of the introduction, I have no idea what we're doing. There's no thesis. There's nothing that tells me where we're going. Some of them aren't engaging. They don't excite me about the topic. They don't want to make me continue reading along. They've missed the mark. Others have conclusions that go through and just summarize what the paper's already done. Again, not what we're looking for. So just basically ignoring the fundamentals, that can be a problem. Another area that I find people have a hard time with MLA or APA format and getting the reference correct. For example, you always need to have a page number when you quote something. And they'll have a quote, and they might have the author's name or the year, but they're missing the page number. And sometimes it's just a matter of paying attention to the little details. And then the other part I would say is sometimes students get so wound up under the concept of research writing that they focus on the research and forget about the writing part. At the end of the day, this still is a paper, and it still needs to adhere to all of the practices of good writing. Well-developed ideas, paragraphs that are unified and each focus on one idea, transitions from paragraph to paragraph, and good editing. A lot of those are fundamental things, and whether it's a research paper or a general paper, they fall into place, and I find students struggle with that. One of the handouts that I have, and again, if you don't have it, it's common problems with student research papers. And I've extracted lines out of past student papers, and I identify in bold font what the problem is, so that you'll be able to see some of the common issues that happen. Next, why do we follow style manuals like APA or MLA? Why can't I just use my own form of referencing? The simple answer to that is it would just be entirely too chaotic. Groups of disciplines have come together and decided whether they'll adhere to APA or MLA, and that will be the standard for what they do, so that anybody doing research in that area adheres to those standards. Anybody reading it sees consistency in how the papers are organized and done. And again, it's entering a culture, learning how things are done. If it weren't for these, you would have 1,000 different researchers all doing 1,000 different things in their papers, and that would be very, very hard to understand and follow. So it brings everybody to the same spot. And by the way, one of the things that my students often ask, and they're sort of afraid that it's cheating, is they look at the sources cited in the scholarship they're finding, and they're curious about whether they can go there and use those. And the answer is a resounding yes, absolutely. If you find a really good article, a lot of your research can get traction by looking at where that scholar has been. So look at that reference page and find those sources. Another question that often comes with that is students want to know if they can cite the research in articles that they're reading, even if that research comes from scholars other than the person writing the article. In a limited way, yes. The ideal is to always go back to the original, because you want to see the context for it, because it could have been taken out of context. We've all had that happen at a human level. We've said something, it was repeated, and the context wasn't there, and people misunderstood how we meant it. That can happen with scholarship too. So you do always want to go back to those original sources. Sometimes you can't find them. So APA and MLA have provisions for using as cited in or as quoted in, where you can reference it to the scholarly journal you found it in, but it tells somebody reading your paper that you didn't get to see the original, that you had to pull it out of a journal article that you discovered. So that is a quick rundown, and the last time we did this webinar, we had a pretty decent volume of submitted questions. So I'd like to allow a good portion of our time left for you to pose what's on your mind. It doesn't make sense for me to go on about things that you don't want to know about, that you already know, or that you may not be interested in. So tell me what is on your mind, and we will probably take a few seconds of downtime here till the questions begin popping up. So if you don't hear anything for a bit, don't feel that we got disconnected or ended. Okay, you guys are quick typists. We have the first question. Is an abstract vital, or is that a thesis? What is the difference? An abstract, that is actually not necessary or vital. I would ask your instructor if he or she would like one. Abstracts are generally connected with longer research papers. If you're doing a research paper around 10 pages, you may not need it. One of 20 or 30, you may. There is a difference between the two. An abstract is basically a very condensed summary of the entire research project. It goes into a little more detail because it's usually a paragraph. The thesis is usually a sentence or two that basically indicates the general direction that the paper will go, and then the details come from there. So that's a distinction between the abstract and the thesis. If you do an abstract, obviously it comes on a page by itself before the research paper begins. The thesis, of course, is embedded in the first paragraph of the paper. Okay. Will there be PowerPoints that can be downloaded? Yeah, we will send you the PowerPoint for this, and I will also scan and send you the key handouts that I've used for what I've spoken about. Okay. How do you keep from being too broad and transition to the next section? Okay, I'm going to answer that as I understand it. If I'm not doing it right, whoever submitted that, please follow up. But by too broad, I presume you mean with the overall topic. And what I think you need to do there is try to focus it down on a very specific thing. Students sometimes think that their papers have to solve all the problems of the world, and they don't. You know, think about a single issue, single population, single area. Okay, great, I did hit that right. And sometimes you might find that a little niche is really all you're looking for. Now, I'll give you an example. The article that we looked at with African American college males at historically black institutions, that study replicated a previous study in all of those areas except for one minor point. The previous study of that population happened at a predominantly white institution. And the researcher narrowed that by thinking, well, I wonder what would happen if we studied this at a historically black institution. Now, the outcome may be the same, it may be different, but that little difference in itself can narrow and focus a topic and create the opportunity for an entire research project. Now, the second part of that was transition. Transitions can be words, phrases, sentences, entire paragraphs. They usually come at the end of one section or at the beginning of another, and they usually either connect a similarity between the two sections or show a shift in focus from one to the other verbally. If you just jump, the reader can feel that there was a jump and was sort of thinks, what happened here? I feel like we changed, but I don't know when or how. So give us a sentence or so to show that. You know, and it can be as simple as, you know, now that we have, you know, explored the spirituality of African American college males, it basically is helpful next to take a look at the people who influence their spirituality. And then your next paragraph can begin to take a look at the people. So you could do it very easily like that. Okay, what is the appropriate way to use footnotes in a research paper? I may be answering this correctly or incorrectly, so follow up and let me know who posed that question. But ask about footnotes maybe someone who hasn't done research in a lot of years. And if that's the case, you will be thrilled to know that we don't use footnotes anymore. It used to be that you would have to type a line, partway across the bottom of the page and do a superscript 1 or 2 and put in your little footnote. We don't do that. We use in-text parenthetical references now, right in the sentence where the reference is, and then that links to a reference or works cited page at the end. So if you're asked about footnotes in terms of referencing, no longer do it. If you're asking about footnotes just in terms of, an item that you want to create some clarifying point on, that's a little different. But I think you meant in terms of referencing. Okay. Is there a difference between the introduction and the background? I mentioned those two terms in connection with the introduction. I think background falls under the introduction. When you're introducing your topic, there may be some background information that's helpful for a reader to know about. Now you have to balance that. You don't want your examples to overtake the topic in terms of background. But if you, again, following on the example of spirituality in African American men, maybe there is some background there that's important to know. Maybe it has to do with their success or lack thereof in college in terms of spirituality. Maybe there is some history in terms of this particular population of students that's interesting and relevant to what you're going to talk about. So things like that would be background that you want to tap into. The blue one? Okay. See, what about when there is too much scholarly material and there are so many perspectives of what you're researching? What keeps my information from restating what's out there and what is not new knowledge? It is likely that you could have an information explosion. So if you're finding that a lot of people are, talking about the same thing, clump them together, and instead of trying to look at all of those individual articles individually, show the commonality. And I tell students when they're finding a lot of ideas, see if there are connections or themes or different headings that they might be able to organize those under and work with them that way. What was the second part of that question? Oh, okay. We accidentally deleted the second part of that question. But if you want to repose that, please do, and I'll get to it. Okay. Another problem I face is brevity. I think I should explain as much as possible, like guiding the reader every step of the way. Is that wrong or bad? I think it's a matter of balance and perspective. I don't think analyzing, interpreting, making connections and things of that nature are bad. I think they're actually quite good. And quite honestly, it's something that I really push my students to do because they have a hard time doing it. But I don't think you have to be, I guess maybe to coin an expression, the master of the obvious. If it's pretty clear, I don't think you need to go into a lot of detail about it. It's hard to know, what to say about that without a specific piece of writing in front of me. But one thing that I would suggest is that if you are wondering about that, is find somebody, another student, to read your paper and ask for feedback on that particular point. And you may get some good information there. But as a practice, no, I don't think that's bad to do. Okay. This one here. It says, is it okay to do all of your research papers in one style? I'm not exactly sure where that's going, but it actually touches upon a few things that I think are important to think about. In terms of style, there are a couple levels of style. One is, I had mentioned APA or MLA. APA is American Psychological Association. MLA is Modern Language Association. There are also other style manuals out there. These two you'll see most commonly. In terms of style, APA would be for the social sciences, psychology, sociology, criminology. Education also uses it. You'll see it in business. MLA is for the humanities. You'll see that in English, philosophy, theology, areas like that. So it is important in terms of format, when you pick one of these, use it for the entire paper. Be consistent. Don't mix them back and forth. Also, in terms of format or style, research papers are supposed to be very formal in terms of their language. They're not to have opinion, editorial, I think, I feel, I believe. You need to use evidence to show that. So, for example, you wouldn't say in a research paper, I think that the explosion of teenage crime in urban areas is the result of single-parent households. Now, you might think that, but that's just your opinion. In your research paper, you would say, studies have shown, and you would reference some right there, that 70% of those found responsible for committing inner-city crime come from single-parent households. Oh, okay, that's not your opinion. There's actually some evidence for that. And that's how you want to go about a research paper with format and style. Okay. How do you cite quotes taken from a website? That is actually a very good question, and the answer to that question has been evolving ever since websites first came out. We use a book called The Curious Researcher. In the back of the book, it shows how to handle different sources. An online source, and we can send you the link for this, Purdue University's Writing Center website. And if you just Google Purdue University Writing Center, you'll find that site has a really good online guide for using APA or MLA. And you could go there and you could see how to cite electronic sources, websites, rather than go into the details of it here. That's a good resource for you to find how to do that. But one of the things you don't do is, you don't want to cut and paste an enormous URL into your paper or into your reference or works cited page. And that was something people were doing for a while. Who's going to sit and type that in? So there are some better ways for doing that. And we'll get you the link so you can find that. Is there a limit on the number of references or citations that could be in your paper? That's an interesting question. Sort of yes, sort of no. I would say in terms of percentage, I would say most of what I've read recommends not more than 35% of the total paper being cited words from somebody else. That can be a little bit hard to follow. I would say here's the better test rather than worrying about numbers. You want to think about the fact that you are the primary voice in the paper. So when you take a look at a paragraph, if your paragraph has 7 sentences in it, and 6 of those sentences have references from some other place, that's too many. You've eclipsed your voice. If that paragraph has 2 or 3, you're probably in good territory. So I would look at the balance that you have rather than worrying about counting things up. And I think overall that's going to be easier to do and is going to give you a good result in the end. With that, know that your introduction and your conclusion may and probably will have some references, but in terms of ratio, your review of lit, by the nature of what it does, will have a lot more. So if you look at your paper and you think, oh my introduction only has 2 references or maybe none, don't be worried about that. Again, think about what you're doing in those sections, and that's okay. How do you develop your voice on a topic you have little knowledge about? I think the beginning way to do that is that working knowledge. Poking around and just finding what you can find and reading what you can understand at your level. You can use, I wouldn't recommend, common sources for referencing in your paper, but they're probably decent for getting you started. General magazines, newspapers, the website, news broadcasts, textbooks from classes. Maybe there is a lecture or somebody visiting a university and it's on a topic you're interested in. Go see that person, see what that person has to say. And it's just that general building up of knowledge and comfort. If you're working on a topic and you can't get to that point, trust your instinct. See if there is an option, and you would probably want to work with your faculty member for shifting your subject. Because if you just can't get your mind wrapped around it, you're not going to enjoy it, and you're probably not going to do a good job. Okay. Style-wise, could you use first person, second person, or third person, passive voice or active voice? Should you be consistent or free-flowing? Okay, a lot there. First person, I would try to stay away from. I would also try to stay away from second person. I think third person is probably the better. People, subjects, researchers, anything that would go with he, she, they would be the best to go with there. Passive voice, active voice. I like active voice because it shows actor and receiver. It's a little bit of a corny example, but, rather than saying the window was looked out of by me, you would say I looked out the window. And you could see the distinction in those two across a research paper. Active voice would end up being a lot better. And then the last thing here, consistent or free-flowing. Yeah, be consistent. Try to stick with third person. Try to stick with active voice. Follow that through. That said, writing is a creative thing. You could run into a very unique situation that would require a little change in that. If you do and it makes sense, go with it. One of the things, like with first person, I'd mentioned to stay away from that, and a student had a quote from a scholar, and in the quote, somebody was referenced, and it was first person, and the student was concerned. Oh, can I use that? Well, yes, it's in the quote, and that would be fine. So don't be too rigid, but definitely try to be consistent. Okay. What should I write on the uniqueness of the study? That seems like that might be a good question, but I'm not sure what it's asking. So if you could resubmit some clarity on that, I'll try another one here. What are your thoughts on using subject matter experts when a topic is a very new concept and little scholarly reference sources are available? I think that it's possible that you could do something with that. Sometimes, and here's how, there could be a very current topic, and sometimes students run out and they want to find scholarship on that exact topic or what happened. For example, in Philadelphia, a year or so ago, and in some other cities too, we sort of had this phenomenon of flash mobs with teenagers. And, that got a lot of press and a lot of commentary. And I don't know that, given the newness of the phenomenon, that there was really anything in the journals on flash mobs at that point. So what I tell students is don't always go out and try to find things that are connected with exactly what you want. Think about how you can find something that applies to it. Well, if you've ever studied psychology, you've heard of a phenomenon called groupthink. And it has to do with individuals, when they're together, doing things and engaging in behaviors that if they were on their own, they would never do. So that may never have been termed flash mob, but you could apply some ideas from groupthink and scholarship there. And then you could balance that out with some more current comments. But in that case, I would say that would be fine. Keep it in perspective. If you're doing a research paper and the instructor says, I'd like you to have 10 to 12 sources that are scholarly, I think you could maybe balance that out with maybe up to 2, 3 at the most, that might be a little bit more current. What is the best way to integrate your voice with the research literature sections of the paper? Okay. That is a good question, and voice is a tricky thing because research papers are supposed to have some academic distance. So you're not involved in creative writing and using first person, being poetic, all of the things that we've always attributed to voice in the past. So I think you have to shift the way you think of voice. And it isn't so much how you would sound or say things, but in the perspective that you have and in the point that you are trying to make. And that's where your voice will come in. So it's more the ideas that you have. And again, to go back to that point I made before, not I think, I feel, I believe, but the evidence that you have for what is going on. That's your voice, that's your perspective, that's your angle. Okay. What style is used in medical or technical writing? That question really taps into researching in the disciplines. Medical and technical, medical writing is going to be very based in the natural sciences. It tends to be very straightforward, and it's based in evidence. What can be seen, what can be proven. Technical writing is going to be very straightforward, very to the point, kind of like business writing. So those styles, very scientific, tend to be briefer, very focused. What happened? What do I need to know? What's the outcome? Where do we go from here? That's very different from styles for, say, the humanities, where you're going to find very long pieces of writing based in theories, a lot of gray area. Things may not necessarily be proven. Someone might apply a theory such as applying feminism to the reading of a Scarlet Letter, and how that all goes. And I'm actually really glad that question came up, because it shows that not a journal isn't a journal isn't a journal. Based upon the field and the area, they will look very different. And you need to get your mind wrapped around how the different disciplines present information. Okay. So I think we have time for one more question, which is, try to pick a really good one here. All right. Actually, I'm going to take the one about visuals in a research paper, because people often ask, I have a student who just did a research paper on homelessness, and she asked me if she could use some photos. And I think it's something that you can do, and I would do it in a judicious way. Most research papers will not have photos. If you do want to use one, make it a really, really good one, and make sure that it really has a reason for being there. You don't want to just put one in for the sake of having a photo there. If to go back to the medicine part again, maybe you are writing a paper on something that has to do with dermatology, and you want to show a picture of a particular skin condition. That would make perfect sense, and such a picture has a really good reason for being there. If you are doing a picture on flash mobs and you just want to insert a picture of a city skyline because they happen in the city, I wouldn't think that that's a very good reason. So use that as kind of a barometer for it. But when you are doing research, essentially, the world is your oyster. You have a wide open field. My contact information is at the end of this PowerPoint. I think it's on the last slide. So take that down. Definitely feel free to write to me individually with questions that I may not have gotten to that you submitted. I'll be real glad to write back to you. And I know that we owe you a copy of this PowerPoint and also a PDF of the handouts that I use to support what I've said. And I'll make sure that those get out to you as quickly as possible.
And thank you very much for joining us.